How's everybody doing despite the temperature? Good. Excellent. All right. So once again, thank you all the visitors for coming today and to our online listeners. This week is another kind of difficult story. Pastors tend to stay away from Genesis and the Old Testament because they have harsher outcomes, and so it's harder to relate. And we're going to do another story in which I'm really glad we did Transfiguration, because now it's going to be easier on you guys. By the way, you did great with Transfiguration, understanding it and getting something out of it, so good job with that. The title for this week, Every Moment of Resistance of Temptation is a Victory, is said by Frederick William Faber. He was a Catholic priest that lived from 1814 to 1863. He was a hymn writer and theologian. And so it really goes hand in hand with what we're talking about. And you're going to feel pretty good about it, saying it to yourself as you go through the week and even throughout the year. So we have two main things going on here. We have two chapters in which we find out the warrant for being in the garden, and then the condition for the plot development of what comes up of everything. So we'll start off with the first verse. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. When you read these things, they seem straightforward, like this is it. How can you interpret that any other way? But look at what's happening right now. It's a vocation. See, there's a strong suitability for this particular career. How many farmers do we have in the room? And how many farmers live around you? Majority of the people, right? And so you can relate, you understand, and you know why. But to till and keep something is the specifics of the job. And doesn't that come with every job? Even when you're talking about parenthood or being a student, anything in that, you till and keep it. You keep on doing something to condition yourself to make things better. It's work. And work is done no matter what you're doing, even if you're cleaning the house. So when we're talking about I'm going to keep doing that, tilling and keeping, what specifically are we talking about that? Are we just talking about farmers? Is he just talking about putting him in a garden and making him rake and hoe? Is that what he's talking about? Are we talking about everything? So this applies to all of us. This is what I'm trying to get at. And so you have the gardener, or is he talking about being a shepherd? You see, when you're tending a flock, or when you're showing people or being a leader, you're showing how to get stuff done and more importantly, how to make things grow. And that's kind of one of the main jobs we're here for, right? So he takes a human and he puts him in care to tend the garden. Would there be a garden without the farmer? Would there be a field of corn without the farmer? Yeah, things grow, but when they grow in the wild, do you see them in abundance like you do on a farm field? Or is it kind of like a conglomeration of whatever pops up? And there's a story in the Bible about seeds dropping. And if they drop in the thorns, can they grow? They could, but they get choked out, right? And so this tilling and keeping, this is this pruning we're talking about. Keeping something, keeping it healthy, making it grow, this is all part of it. And for it to be a success, you have to keep at it and keep with the skills, keep your skills up. So when we're talking about the garden itself, are we talking about God in that sense? Or do we think of him as the farmer? But in the story, we're talking about man being the farmer. So if you're thinking about God, I kind of want you to sway a little bit to yourselves. I want you to put yourself in that situation, that you're the farmer to keep. Now, we're tending to the garden, so we're not tending to God per se. I mean, do we bring him stuff? When God gets thirsty, does he ask you for a glass of water? If he does, you got to tell me, because something might be wrong. But no, when we do the work we do here, who does it affect? Us, friends, fellow Christians, those around us in the community. Isn't that who it directly touches? And so this is the garden. This is the garden. The things we exist in, life, is the garden. And we till and keep it. So as I said, we water it, and we prune it, and we take care of it. Now, those farmers in here, what happens after that is done? Now, obviously, you have more work. There's animals and stuff. But when you're talking about the field itself, you go, you till, you plant, but then what? Is it always a success? Do you always get that yield that you look for every year? Come on, guys. No, you don't. And it's out of your control. So are you just supposed to sit back and observe? You're thinking, what else can I do? I did all the work. I put all the time in. There are elements that is out of my control. And that's where we come in with the title. That every moment of resistance of temptation is a victory. For you to get to how far you are, no matter the weather, you got there for a reason. You got there by resisting things, by doing things, and committing to something. Verse 16, and the Lord God commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden. One of those words that always sticks out is commanded. If somebody commands you to do something, even if it's not God, somebody in life says, I command you to do this. That sticks out to you, doesn't it? I mean, are you going to listen right away? You're kind of going to get a little upset, probably, even though you're not the boss. To command to do something, you can ask to do something. So that word commanded sticks out. And especially when God's saying it. That means you're supposed to pay attention. And that's where it comes from. So we get that instruction. And two specific trees are mentioned in here. We have the tree of life, and then we have the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And apparently there's a whole Wikipedia page about that tree. It goes a little bit deeper than just being a tree, and we're going to talk about that. But you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will surely die. Does that tree exist today? Do we know about it? Do you guys know where it is? I don't either. But it's mentioned. And because God commanded it, we know how important it is. But this leads us to our second set. Where did I stop? I'm sorry. So, when we're talking about the knowledge of good and evil, isn't that what we strive for? Like, wouldn't God want to give us fruit from that tree so that we could all know what to do and what not to do? Doesn't that make sense? So we go through life knowing, okay, I'm not supposed to say or do that. And without falling through the cracks of despair and bad things happening to us, why can't it just go right the first time? Wouldn't that make life so much easier? So at first you're like, yeah, I would want for the fruit too, so I could know how to be a better Christian. That's not specifically what he's saying here. See, the knowledge of everything opens the door to all the bad stuff too. You have sin, the creation and availability of it, as well as false idols. Remember, what happened as soon as they ate it? They were self-conscious, and they had to cover up. Before that, that wasn't a concern of theirs. So their eyes were open. They're more knowledgeable, but look what happened. They became aware of something that wasn't that important to them before. And now when we're talking about temptation, that's right up front. Didn't know about it before. It's here now, and I may want it, even though you know you shouldn't, which happens all the time. How many of you stuck to your diet since New Year's resolution? Neither did I. Don't worry about it. Which is why we talked about reachable goals, right? So if they ate and now all this bad stuff has happened, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, we should be the smartest people. All of us should be the smartest people that we know, right? Well, don't we have that superpower now? Isn't that what that came from? That goes against what we just talked about. So it's not as if we have the highest IQ. That's not exactly what we're talking about. Now that you're older, those of you who have grown up, you can see, I can't believe I did that when I was a kid. How many times have you said that to yourself? I jumped off that bridge. I smoked that cigarette. And it led to 30 years of bad choices after that. But you stopped it, didn't you? You learned, which is all part of it. Now, think of it as filling a cup of water, okay? So you have, our brains may have an unlimited capacity that we know of. We haven't been able to map it all out yet. So we have that capability as far as we know. But our brains may hit its capacity at what temptation and morality is compromised. So what do I mean by that? What we just talked about with the temptation. If you didn't know that something existed, so if you sit right here and you think of a sin, that a guilty pleasure, if you will, that you like to indulge in, or that you have indulged in that you knew you shouldn't, whatever that one thing you're thinking about, if you didn't know it existed, could you do it? I don't think so. So that knowledge really isn't power at that point. It's working against you. And that's the evil that we're talking about. That's the temptation. I love the smiles. That means you're listening. It's great. So in these three, in this first section, it's important to note that any one verse without the other two is it living a perverted lifestyle. Each one of these is important. It's crucial to helping yourself. So if you get one thing out of the chapter, out of one verse, it goes right with the subject we're talking about. Of every moment of resistance of temptation is a victory. Every moment that you understand something, or you're able to identify it, or you're able to overcome it, it's a victory. And you've already been doing it this year. So now we have the second set. This is what they call the original sin. That's what they call it, in quotes. You have two parts of the scenario that you guys go through or have seen in life. You have the serpent questions what God said. So we're going to read verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord had made. He said to the woman, did God really say you must not eat from the tree in the garden? Devout Christian all your life, if you are, have you ever questioned something God has said in the Bible? Or you just agree all the time? I'm a pastor and I question. That's kind of our job. We, as Christians, as those who are here to spread his word, if we can't fully understand what he's talking about, how can we relay that information to somebody else? It'll be a bit difficult to look at it objectively and to see different ways we can look at it, different ways we can sneak stuff in and show somebody a different way. That came from experience. That came from that outlook. The second part, which I'll go back, but it's from 4 and 5. The serpent contradicts what God said. So you will not surely die, the serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Now what we just talked about, we can see as I read that, you kind of cringe. Like, oh, now I know what he's talking about, and I don't want any part of that now. And that's great. That's what we're supposed to do. So, talking about those two things, has that happened to you before? Have you shown your Christianity in a public eye? They find out about it, and they shoot a question at you. I know there's specific people in this room that has come in contact with that. And how you react is probably way more important than asking the question itself. Misguided, misunderstandings, they happen from people whose minds aren't open and who haven't accepted God. And we can't hold that against them. So answering them, helping them, is going to mean all the difference for them to successfully do our job. How do we deal with those times too? You have something when the serpent contradicts what God said. If somebody's ever done that to you and you're comfortable with your beliefs, that can really get you upset. That can get you mad. Your eyebrows go down. You're like, oh, it just tastes bad, And so, contradicting God. Now, is it right to stand up somebody, go face to face, toe to toe with them, and scream your beliefs at them? Is that going to do any more or less than choosing your words carefully and resolving it a better way? Really can't think of a scenario myself. It's super important to watch what you say, be careful how you say it, and be careful who you say it to, most importantly. So identifying the people you're talking to. We'll jump to verse 6. When the woman saw the fruit of the tree was good for the food was pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. So you have two gateways for sin right there. Good for food and pleasing to the eye. How many times has that happened to you in life? You see something, you hear something, you hear what it has done for somebody. We're not talking about drugs per se, but think about it. Think about how you feel when you're eating that triple chocolate cake. You love it, don't you? And as soon as you see it on TV, guess what you want? Triple chocolate cake, right? And so that's the first temptation. To look at something and go, is that really necessary? Or more importantly, would God be okay if I did this? And in turn, eventually you'll go, am I okay if I do this? Going against yourself is sometimes the hardest thing. And in fact, have you ever gone against yourself when you know God is okay with something? When you say, yeah, I want to do that. And then you think about it a minute and go, wait, am I allowed to do that? Yeah, that's okay. That critical thinking is important. To diagnose, to break something apart and say, is each step of this going to make me a better person? Is it going to help somebody else? Or am I just causing problems? Am I letting this virus, this evilness envelop me? The start of it, to stop something when it starts, is probably the most important thing too. How many of you get migraines in here? Anybody but me? No? When you get a migraine, as far as I'm concerned, to catch it as soon as it starts is way easier to get rid of it than letting it go throughout the day and then trying to get rid of it. Or think of it as a cold. If you start antibiotics when it starts, it goes away a lot quicker. Same thing goes with sin. You stop it when it starts, it's not going to take over. And it's not going to consume you. Verse 7, then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they were realized they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. This once innocence is shattered. Can you remember being innocent as a child? Can you remember not caring as a child? Wasn't that a happy time? You didn't have to worry about times or dates or paying bills or taxes or none of that. Oh, joyous, joyous. But it's shattered, and it was turned to fear right away. That is the first thing that they did, is they sewed fig leaves to put on themselves. Can you imagine being naked in public? Would any of you be comfortable to answer that? Because I don't want to see it. It's okay. But as soon as that's a fear. That's a fear. Being naked in public? I don't want anybody to see that. Mostly because you guys don't need to be blinded. But they realized they were naked, and that reference in what just happened, their morals immediately compromised. Immediately. And because of that one decision they made to commit to a sin, the innocence is gone. And fear consumes you. How many of you rationally think when you're fearful of something? If you do, please see a psychiatrist. Because that's not right. Fear is a absolutely right answer to something going wrong, that fight or flight that we're talking about. So that Fearfulness now creates a profound tension in your relation to God. Can you be a true Christian and be faithful but fearful at the same time? Can you be afraid of God and worship him? Are we supposed to be afraid of God?
We're supposed to know that there will be wrath for those who don't accept.
And if we don't care about that, what happens to us? Nothing good. Can you think of anything good? I don't think so.
Live according to our own desires instead of his.
That's right. That's right. So we see, and here's another strong point. How was all this done? Were they strong-armed into it? Were they held down? Were they forced to eat the apple? Did he hold them down and shove it in their faces? No. What did he do? He spoke. That's all he did to make them commit this original sin. Now, how scary is that? In the world we live in, and the things that are happening in the news, you see it all the time. These acts of violence, these things that are done, these unthinkable things that we can't possibly fathom. Is it speech? On occasion, but rarely. And when we think of this forcefulness, this committing sin, this doing evil, this horrible burden, do we think of it as a willful act? Again, not often. It's a forced thing. It's, you made me do this. And have we blamed evilness and the devil for our evil ways? And was it always his fault? Not always. You see, we have free will. So these sins that are committed, they're not because some puppeteer is telling you what to do. And when every moment you resist that temptation, that's one more step to goodness. And you can't overlook any of the steps because they're all important. How many of you collect pennies? Do you have a penny jar? And you take it to the bank and you got $70 worth of pennies. But when you're putting 2 cents, 3 cents in, are you thinking about that? Not really, but you sure like that $70, don't you? And that's the end game we need to look to. That overcoming temptation is going to add up. So patience is a virtue. So let's just talk about Lent here in this last part. Lent is a time to sort out the voice of life and the controversies of death. So we have an intervention of life. We just started the Lent, okay? And so controversies of death. Counter voices, that's what I wrote. Counter voices of death. When you watch the news and your eyebrows go down, you see something on the internet and you really don't like it. They irk you, they twist you, they make you squirm. And you want to shout it out, you want to scream, because it's a terrible thing. But then there's that counterpart of the voice of life. If somebody does wrong, are we supposed to tell them that you're a lost cause, you can't find God, goodbye? Or are they the people who need our prayers the most? Are they the ones who need our help? And if you don't step up, can you expect your neighbor to step up? Can you expect somebody to do it for you? So not only is overcoming these small temptations important, but also realizing these counter voices of death that can save your soul and lead you on the path of righteousness.